Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., known professionally as John Denver, was an American singer-songwriter, actor, activist, and humanitarian whose greatest commercial success was as a solo singer. After traveling and living in numerous locations while growing up in his military family, Denver began his music career with folk music groups during the late 1960s. Starting in the 1970s, he was one of the most popular acoustic artists of the decade and one of its best-selling artists. By 1974, he was one of America's best-selling performers. AllMusic has called Denver among the most beloved entertainers of his era. Denver recorded and released approximately 300 songs, about 200 of which he composed. He had 33 albums and singles that were certified gold and platinum in the U.S. by the RIAA, with estimated sales of more than 33 million units. He recorded and performed primarily with an acoustic guitar and sang about his joy in nature, disdain for city life, enthusiasm for music, and relationship trials. Denver's music appeared on a variety of charts, including country music, the Billboard Hot 100, and adult contemporary, earning 12 gold and 4 platinum albums with his signature songs, Take Me Home, Country Roads, Poems, Prayers and Promises, Annie's Song, Rocky Mountain High, Calypso, Thank God I'm a Country Boy, and Sunshine on My Shoulders. Denver appeared in several films and television specials during the 1970s and 1980s, including the 1977 hit Oh, God, in which he starred alongside George Burns. He continued to record into the 1990s, also focusing on environmental issues as well as lending vocal support to space exploration and testifying in front of Congress to protest censorship in music. He lived in Aspen for much of his life, and he was known for his love of Colorado. In 1974, Denver was named Poet Laureate of the state. The Colorado State Legislature also adopted Rocky Mountain High as one of its 2 state songs in 2007, and West Virginia did the same for Take Me Home, Country Roads in 2014. An avid pilot, Denver died at age 53 in a single fatality crash while piloting a recently purchased light plane. Early life Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. was born on December 31, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico, to Captain Henry John Deutschendorf Sr., a United States Army Air Forces pilot stationed at Roswell Army Airfield, and his wife, Irma Louise. In his 1994 autobiography, Take Me Home, Denver described his life as the eldest son of a family shaped by a stern father who could not show his love for his children. Because Denver's father was in the military and his family moved often, it was difficult for him to make friends and fit in with other children of his own age. Constantly being the new kid was troubling for the introverted Denver, and he grew up always feeling as though he should be somewhere else, but never knowing where that right place was. While the family was stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona, Denver was a member of the Tucson, Arizona Boys Chorus for 2 years. He was content in Tucson, but his father was then transferred to Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, where Denver disliked the racism of his segregated school. The family later moved to Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth, Texas, where Denver graduated from Arlington Heights High School. Fort Worth was a distressing experience for Denver, and in his 3rd year of high school, he drove his father's car to California to visit family friends and begin his music career. His father flew to California in a friend's jet to retrieve him, and Denver reluctantly returned to complete his schooling. Early career at age 11, Denver received an acoustic guitar from his grandmother. He learned to play well enough to perform at local clubs by the time he was in college. He adopted the surname, Denver, after the capital of his favorite state, Colorado. He decided to change his name when Randy Sparks, founder of the New Christy Minstrels, suggested that Deutschendorf would not fit comfortably on a marquee. Denver attended Texas Tech University in Lubbock and sang in a folk music group, the Alpine Trio, while studying architecture. He was also a member of the Delta Tau Delta fraternity. Denver dropped out of Texas Tech in 1963 and moved to Los Angeles, where he sang in folk clubs. In 1965, he joined the Chad Mitchell Trio, replacing founder Chad Mitchell. After more personnel changes, the trio later became known as Denver, Boise, and Johnson. In 1969, Denver abandoned band life to pursue a solo career and released his first album for RCA Records, Rhymes and Reasons. 2 years earlier, he had made a self-produced demo recording of some of the songs he played at his concerts. It included a song he had written called, Babe, I Hate to Go, later renamed, Leaving on a Jet Plane. Denver made several copies and gave them out as presents for Christmas. Producer Milt Okun, who produced records for the Chad Mitchell Trio and the high-profile folk group Peter, Paul and Mary, had become Denver's producer as well. Okun brought the unreleased Jet Plane song to Peter, Paul and Mary. Their version of the song hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Denver's song also made it to number 2 in the UK in February 1970. Having also made number 1 on the US Cashbox chart in December 1969. RCA did not actively promote Rhymes and Reasons with a tour, but Denver embarked on an impromptu supporting tour throughout the Midwest, stopping at towns and cities, offering to play free concerts at local venues. When he was successful in persuading a school, college, American Legion Hall, or coffeehouse to let him play, He distributed posters in the town and usually showed up at the local radio station, guitar in hand, offering himself for an interview. With his foot in the door as writer of Leaving on a Jet Plane, he was often successful in gaining some promotional airtime, usually featuring 1 or 2 songs performed live. Some venues let him play for the door, others restricted him to selling copies of the album at intermission and after the show. After several months of this constant low-key touring schedule, he had sold enough albums to persuade RCA to take a chance on extending his recording contract. He had also built a sizable and solid fan base, many of whom remained loyal throughout his career. Denver recorded 2 more albums in 1970, Take Me to Tomorrow and Whose Garden Was This?, including a mix of songs he had written and cover versions of other artists' compositions. Career peak Denver's next album, Poems, Prayers and Promises, was a breakthrough for him in the United States, thanks in part to the single, Take Me Home, Country Roads, which went to number 2 on the Billboard charts despite the first pressings of the track being distorted. Its success was due in part to the efforts of his new manager, future Hollywood producer Jerry Weintraub, who signed Denver in 1970. Weintraub insisted on a reissue of the track and began a radio airplay campaign that started in Denver, Colorado. Denver's career flourished thereafter, and he had a series of hits over the next 4 years. In 1972, he scored his first top 10 album with Rocky Mountain High, with its title track reaching the top 10 in 1973. In 1974 and 1975, Denver experienced an impressive chart dominance, with a string of 4 #1 songs and 3 #1 albums. In the 1970s, Denver's on-stage appearance included long blonde hair and wire-rimmed granny glasses. His embroidered shirts emblazoned with images commonly associated with the American West were created by the designer and appliqué artist Anna Zapp. Weintraub insisted on a significant number of television appearances, including a series of half-hour shows in the United Kingdom. Despite Denver's protests at the time, "I've had no success in Britain. I mean none." In December 1976, Weintraub told Maureen Orth of Newsweek, "I knew the critics would never go for John. I had to get him to the people." After appearing as a guest on many shows, Denver hosted his own variety and music specials, including several concerts from Red Rocks Amphitheater. His seasonal special, Rocky Mountain Christmas, was watched by more than 60 million people and was the highest-rated show for the ABC network at that time. His live concert special, An Evening with John Denver, won the 1974–1975 Emmy Award for Outstanding Special, Comedy Variety or Music. When Denver ended his business relationship in 1982 because of Weintraub's focus on other projects, Weintraub threw Denver out of his office and accused him of Nazism. Denver later told Arthur Tobier, when the latter transcribed his autobiography, "I'd bend my principles to support something you wanted of me. And of course, every time you bend your principles, whether because you don't want to worry about it, or because you're afraid to stand up for fear of what you might lose, you sell your soul to the devil." Denver was also a guest star on The Muppet Show, the beginning of the lifelong friendship between Denver and Jim Henson that spawned 2 television specials with the Muppets, A Christmas Together and Rocky Mountain Holiday. He also tried acting, appearing in The Colorado Cattle Caper episode of the McCloud television movie in February 1974. He starred in the 1977 film Oh, God! Opposite George Burns. Denver hosted the Grammy Awards 5 times in the 1970s and 1980s, and guest hosted The Tonight Show on multiple occasions. In 1975, he was awarded the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year award. At the ceremony, the outgoing Entertainer of the Year, Charlie Rich, presented the award to his successor after he set fire to the envelope containing the official notification of the award. Some speculated Rich was protesting the selection of a non-traditional country artist for the award, but Rich's son disputes that, saying his father was drunk, taking pain medication for a broken foot, and just trying to be funny. Denver's music was defended by country singer Kathy Mattea, who told Alana Nash of Entertainment Weekly, "A lot of people write him off as lightweight, but he articulated a kind of optimism, and he brought acoustic music to the forefront, bridging folk, pop, and country in a fresh way. People forget how huge he was worldwide." In 1977, Denver, Colorado founded the Hunger Project with Werner Erhard and Robert W. Fuller. He served for many years and supported the organization until his death. President Jimmy Carter appointed Denver to serve on the President's Commission on World Hunger. Denver wrote the song, I Want to Live, as the commission's theme song. In 1979, Denver performed Rhymes and Reasons at the Music for UNICEF concert. Royalties from the concert performances were donated to UNICEF. His father taught him to fly in the mid-1970s, which led to their reconciliation. In 1980, Denver and his father, by then a lieutenant colonel, co-hosted an award-winning television special, The Higher We Fly, The History of Flight. It won the Osborne Award from the Aviation Space Writers Association, and was honored by the Houston Film Festival. Political activism in the mid-1970s, Denver became outspoken in politics. He expressed his ecologic interests in the epic 1975 song, Calypso, an ode to the eponymous exploration ship RV Calypso used by Jacques Cousteau. In 1976, he campaigned for Carter, who became a close friend and ally. Denver was a supporter of the Democratic Party and of a number of charitable causes for the environmental movement, the homeless, the poor, the hungry, and the African AIDS crisis. He founded the charitable Winstar Foundation in 1976 to promote sustainable living. His dismay at the Chernobyl disaster led to precedent-setting concerts in parts of Communist Asia and Europe. During the 1980s, Denver was critical of the Reagan administration and remained active in his campaign against hunger, for which Reagan awarded Denver the Presidential World Without Hunger Award in 1987. Denver's criticism of the conservative politics of the 1980s was expressed in his autobiographical folk rock ballad, Let Us Begin. In an open letter to the media, he wrote that he opposed oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Denver had battled to expand the refuge in the 1980s, and he praised President Bill Clinton for his opposition to the proposed drilling. The letter, which he wrote in the midst of the 1996 United States presidential election, was one of the last he ever wrote. Denver was also on the National Space Society's Board of Governors for many years. Later years in humanitarian work, Denver had a few more U.S. top 30 hits as the 1970s ended, but nothing to match his earlier success. He began to focus more on humanitarian and sustainability causes, focusing extensively on nature conservation projects. He made public expression of his acquaintances and friendships with ecological design researchers such as Richard Buckminster Fuller and Amory Lovins, from whom he said he learned much. He also founded the environmental group Plant It 2020. Denver had a keen interest in solutions to world hunger. He visited Africa during the 1980s to witness firsthand the suffering caused by starvation and work with African leaders toward solutions. From 1973 to at least 1979, Denver annually performed at the yearly fundraising picnic for the Aspen Camp School for the Deaf, raising half of the camp's annual operating budget. During the Aspen Valley Hospital's $1.7 million capital campaign in 1979, Denver was the largest single donor. In 1983 and 1984, Denver hosted the annual Grammy Awards. In the 1983 finale, Denver was joined on stage by folk music legend Joan Baez, with whom he led an all-star version of "Blowin' in the Wind" and "Let the Sunshine In", joined by such diverse musical icons as Jennifer Warnes, Donna Summer, and Rick James. In 1984, ABC Sports president Roone Arledge asked Denver to compose and sing the theme song for the 1984 Winter Olympics in Sarajevo. Denver worked as both a performer and a skiing commentator, as skiing was another of his enthusiasms. He composed "The Gold and Beyond", and sang it for the Olympic Games athletes, as well as local venues including many schools. In 1985, Denver asked to participate in the singing of "We Are the World", but was turned down. According to Ken Cragen, Denver was turned down because many people felt his image would hurt the credibility of the song as a pop-rock anthem. "I didn't agree with this assessment," Cragen said, but he reluctantly turned Denver down anyway. For Earth Day 1990, Denver was the on-camera narrator of a well-received environmental television program, in partnership with Earth, with then EPA Administrator William K. Riley. Due to his love of flying, he was attracted to NASA and became dedicated to America's work in outer space. He conscientiously worked to help bring into being the Citizens in Space program. In 1985, Denver received the NASA Exceptional Public Service Medal for helping to increase awareness of space exploration by the peoples of the world, an award usually restricted to spaceflight engineers and designers. Also in 1985, he passed NASA's rigorous physical exam and was in line for a spaceflight, a finalist for the first citizens' trip on the Space Shuttle in 1986. After the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster with teacher Krista McAuliffe aboard, Denver dedicated his song, "Flying for Me", to all astronauts, and continued to support NASA. He entered discussions with the Soviet space program about purchasing a flight aboard one of their rockets. The talks fell through after the price tag was rumored to be as high as $20 million. Denver testified before the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee on the topic of censorship during a Parents Music Resource Center hearing in 1985. Contrary to his innocuous public image as a musician, Denver openly stood with more controversial witnesses like Frank Zappa and Dee Snider of the heavy metal band Twisted Sister in opposing the PMRC's objectives. For instance, Denver described how he was censored for "Rocky Mountain High", which was misconstrued as a drug song. Denver also toured Russia in 1985. His 11 concerts in the USSR were the first by any American artist in more than 10 years. He returned 2 years later to perform at a benefit concert for the victims of the Chernobyl disaster. In October 1992, Denver undertook a multiple-city tour of the People's Republic of China. He also released a greatest hits CD, Homegrown, to raise money for homeless charities. In 1994, he published his autobiography, Take Me Home, in which he candidly spoke of his cannabis, LSD, and cocaine use, marital infidelities, and history of domestic violence. In 1996, he was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. In 1997, Denver filmed an episode for the television series Nature, centering on the natural wonders that inspired many of his best-loved songs. His last song, Yellowstone, Coming Home, composed while rafting along the Colorado River with his son and young daughter, is included. In the summer of 1997, shortly before his death, Denver recorded a children's train album for Sony Wonder, All Aboard, produced by longtime friend Roger Nichols. The album consisted of old-fashioned swing, big band, folk, bluegrass, and gospel music woven into a theme of railroad songs. It won a posthumous Best Musical Album for Children Grammy, Denver's only Grammy. His final concert was held in Corpus Christi, Texas, at the Selena Auditorium on October 5. Personal life: Denver's first marriage was to Annie Martel of St. Peter, Minnesota. She was the subject of his hit, Annie's Song, which he composed in only 10 minutes as he sat on a Colorado ski lift after the couple had an argument. They lived in Edina, Minnesota, from 1968 to 1971. After the success of Rocky Mountain High, inspired by a camping trip with Annie and some friends, Denver bought a residence in Aspen, Colorado. He lived in Aspen continuously until his death. The Denvers adopted a boy, Zachary John, and a girl, Anna Kate, who, Denver said, were meant to be theirs. Denver once said, "I'll tell you the best thing about me. I'm some guy's dad. I'm some little gal's dad. When I die, Zachary John and Anna Kate's father, boy, that's enough for me to be remembered by. That's more than enough." Zachary was the subject of A Baby Just Like You, a song that included the line, "Merry Christmas, Little Zachary," and which he wrote for Frank Sinatra. Denver and Martel divorced in 1982. In a 1983 interview shown in the documentary John Denver, Country Boy, Denver said that career demands drove them apart. Martel said they were too young and immature to deal with Denver's sudden success. Following the property settlement, Denver nearly choked Martel. He cut their marital bed in half with a chainsaw. Denver married Australian actress Cassandra Delaney in 1988 after a 2-year courtship. Settling at Denver's home in Aspen, the couple had a daughter, Jessie Bell. Denver and Delaney separated in 1991 and divorced in 1993. Of his second marriage, Denver said that, before our short-lived marriage ended in divorce, she managed to make a fool of me from one end of the valley to the other. In 1993, Denver pleaded guilty to a drunken driving charge and was placed on probation. In August 1994, while still on probation, he was again charged with misdemeanor driving under the influence after crashing his Porsche into a tree in Aspen. Though a July 1997 trial resulted in a hung jury on the second DUI charge, prosecutors later decided to reopen the case, which was closed only after Denver's accidental death in October 1997. In 1996, the Federal Aviation Administration decided that Denver could no longer fly a plane, owing to medical disqualification for failure to abstain from alcohol, a condition that the FAA had imposed in October 1995 after his prior drunk driving conviction. Beyond music, Denver's artistic interests included painting, but because of his limiting schedule he pursued photography, saying once, "Photography is a way to communicate a feeling." An exhibition of over 40 never-before-seen photographs taken by Denver debuted at the Leon Gallery in Denver, Colorado in 2014. Denver was also an avid skier and golfer, but his principal interest was in flying. His love of flying was second only to his love of music. In 1974, he bought a Learjet to fly himself to concerts. He was a collector of vintage biplanes and owned a Crescent Eagle aerobatic plane, 2 Cessna 210 Centurion airplanes, and in 1997 an amateur-built Rutan Long EZ. On April 21, 1989, Denver was in a plane accident while taxiing down the runway at Holbrook Municipal Airport in his vintage 1931 biplane. Denver had stopped to refuel on a flight from Carefree, Arizona, to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Reports stated wind gusts caught the plane, causing it to spin around and sustain extensive damage. Denver was unharmed by the incident. Denver died on the afternoon of October 12, 1997, when his light home-built aircraft, a Rutan Long EZ with registration number N555JD, crashed into Monterey Bay near Pacific Grove, California, while making a series of touch-and-go landings at the nearby Monterey Peninsula Airport. He was the plane's only occupant. The official cause of death was multiple blunt force trauma resulting from the crash. Denver was a pilot with over 2,700 hours of experience. He had pilot ratings for single-engine land and sea, multi-engine land, glider and instrument. He also held a type rating in his Learjet. He had recently purchased the Long EZ aircraft, made by someone else from a kit, and had taken a half-hour checkout flight with the aircraft the day before his accident. Denver was not legally permitted to fly at the time of the crash. In previous years, he had several arrests for drunk driving. In 1996, nearly a year before the accident, the FAA learned that Denver had failed to maintain sobriety by not refraining entirely from alcohol and revoked his medical certification. The accident was not influenced by alcohol use. An autopsy found no sign of alcohol or other drugs in Denver's body. Post-accident investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board showed that the leading cause of the accident was Denver's inability to switch fuel tanks during flight. The quantity of fuel had been depleted during the plane's flight to Monterey, and in several brief practice takeoffs and landings Denver performed at the airport immediately before the final flight. His newly purchased amateur-built Rutan aircraft had an unusual fuel tank selector valve handle configuration. The handle had originally been intended by the plane's designer to be between the pilot's legs. The builder instead put it behind the pilot's left shoulder. The fuel gauge was also placed behind the pilot's seat and was not visible to the person at the controls. An NTSB interview with the aircraft mechanic servicing Denver's plane revealed that he and Denver had discussed the inaccessibility of the cockpit fuel selector valve handle and its resistance to being turned. Before the flight, Denver and the mechanic had attempted to extend the reach of the handle using a pair of vice grip pliers, but this did not solve the problem, and the pilot still could not reach the handle while strapped into his seat. NTSB officials' post-accident investigation showed that because of the fuel selector valve's positioning, switching fuel tanks required the pilot to turn his body 90 degrees to reach the valve. This created a natural tendency to extend one's right foot against the right rudder pedal to support oneself while turning in the seat, which caused the aircraft to yaw and pitch up. The mechanic said that he told Denver that the fuel sight gauges were visible only to the rear cockpit occupant. Denver had asked how much fuel was shown. He told Denver that there was less than half in the right tank and less than a quarter in the left tank. He then provided Denver with an inspection mirror so he could look over his shoulder at the fuel gauges. The mirror was later recovered in the wreckage. Denver said that he would use the autopilot in flight to hold the airplane level while he turned the fuel selector valve. He turned down an offer to refuel, saying that he would be flying for about an hour. The NTSB interviewed 20 witnesses about Denver's last flight. 6 of them had seen the plane crash into the bay near Point Pinos. 4 said the aircraft was originally heading west. 5 said that they saw the plane in a steep bank, with 4 saying that the bank was to the right. 12 described seeing the aircraft in a steep nose-down descent. Witnesses estimated the plane's altitude between 350 and 500 feet when heading toward the shoreline. 8 said they heard a pop, or backfire, accompanied by a reduction in the engine noise level just before the plane crashed into the sea. In addition to Denver's failing to refuel and his subsequent loss of control while attempting to switch fuel tanks, the NTSB determined other key factors that led to the accident. Foremost among these was his inadequate transition training on this type of aircraft and the builder's decision to put the fuel selector handle in a hard-to-reach place. The board issued recommendations on the requirement and enforcement of mandatory training standards for pilots operating home-built aircraft. It also emphasized the importance of mandatory ease of access to all controls, including fuel selectors and fuel gauges, in all aircraft.